to get started in just a couple minutes. If you wouldn't mind grabbing your seats if you're still up, but grab some water and lunch, coffee, whatever you need, and we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Jessica Hoffler. I'm the manager of programs and operations here at Cambia Grove. Thanks for coming to our Lunch and Learn today. How many of you have been to one of our Lunch and Learns? 2? Wow. Okay. So something that's really fun is that this is by far our most well-attended Lunch and Learn, and I don't know why. So please, in our effort to bring programs of value, please humor me by filling out the little 2-question survey. It asks why you're here, and I'm so glad that you are. It also asks if we met your expectations. So we would love to hear your feedback. I'm excited for today for 2 different reasons. One is we've been hosting, Kelly Franklin is over here. She hosted a roundtable about patient-centered design just a moment ago, and then Marcelino is here as well. They're both here from out of town, so thank you for coming all the way to Seattle to join us. Today's all about product development and product design, really focusing on that patient-centered or consumer-centric approach. We hear time and time again that people, this is general, not any of you, but people are often innovating for patients or consumers, but not really understanding what matters to them and designing to what matters and what's really important to them. This can be really confusing because your consumer or patient or end user is often not your customer in healthcare. So I know it's complicated, and right there with you. The second reason that I'm excited is I just got back late last night from Washington, D.C. I was at Health Data Palooza. It's very exciting, but actually was exciting and really inspiring. They talked a lot about the 21st Century Cures Act. I don't know if you all know, but it's open comment period right now for the rulemaking process. If you want to learn more about it, we are hosting Dr. Don Rucker, the National Coordinator for Health IT under HHS, here on April 17th. We're the only innovation hub in the country that he's doing this with. So if you have any questions or need more information about the rules, please attend. There will be Q&A. It's a lot of good information. Something that was discussed at the conference that will come out of some of these proposed rules is open APIs and patient access to their own data. And they said that once patients get their data, there will be price transparency and patients will become empowered consumers. This is exciting. This means that you are not just creating products for consumers that are bought by hospitals or health insurance companies. You'll actually be able to innovate for the consumers, the end users, the people paying for your product. Anyway, I thought that it was very timely that I walked away from that last night and that you all are here today to learn about product design, product development from two leading experts. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our partner from Echo Health Ventures, Kurt Schlein.
Thanks, Jessica. I won't take up too much of you guys' time because the main event is standing right over here. But welcome to everyone that's new. Thanks for coming back for those that have been at these before. So for those that are new, the Lunch and Learn we designed with the Cambia team to focus on what we consider the pillars of commercializing a new idea or business model. And I think product is kind of this concept that is really core to how you ultimately commercialize and bring innovation into healthcare. So really excited to have Marcelino here from Uncorked, an expert in this field, and really excited to have a great lively session with you guys. So Marcelino, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Jessica. Super excited to be here today. Thank you, everyone, for joining during your lunch hour. A little bit of background before we get started. For those of you who have not heard of Uncorked, we're a product design studio. We're based in Portland, Oregon, and we kind of see our work kind of sitting at the intersection of people, technology, and context to create meaningful change. We love complicated problems. We love working with our partners in pursuit of those complicated problems, and typically our work is kind of divided into three areas. So the first is product strategy, which includes everything from like vision and concept creation all the way through brand strategy. Product design, which includes experience design, service design, and actual design research. And then finally, product development, so actually making the things. We've tended to focus on emerging platforms. We got our roots started in mobile application design and development. We've moved into IoT, AI, AR. Our bread and butter has always kind of been native mobile apps, but as we've seen technology get commoditized, we've kind of found ourselves kind of hovering towards those first two pillars of product strategy and product design. We've been fortunate in our 9 years to work with some really, really awesome brands from A to S, I guess. I'm sure there's a Z somewhere. But we've worked with large brands. Typically, we work with innovation teams or groups that are kind of tasked with solving a complex problem, something that might be in market 18 months from now. So we like looking towards the future, not too far in the future, but somewhere like in the near future. And a little bit about me. I am the CEO of Uncorked, founder. I used to work in advertising. I've often joked that Uncorked is my apology for working in advertising. I love advertising. I love brands. I love storytelling. But I was kind of drawn by this desire to be closer to product versus telling a story about somebody else's product. And so that was kind of my impetus for jumping into this world that we find ourselves in. I can be found on Twitter if that's your thing. There's also an email address. Just kind of curious, makeup of the audience. I'd love to get an understanding, maybe by show of hands. How many of you are kind of working at a startup, any stage, early stage to late stage? Great. How many of you work for a larger organization? Of those within large organizations, innovation teams or kind of R&D type functions? Great. And then how many of you are kind of like ecosystem developers? You're a venture capitalist, you're a mentor, you're an advisor. It's okay if you've raised your hand before for something else. Just kind of curious, like who are kind of the ecosystem folks here in the room? One person. All right, cool. Thank you. All right. I I like planning. I also like knowing what's ahead. I imagine that some of you do as well. So before I get into the actual presentation, I figured I'd give you a little bit of a preview so that you don't find yourselves lost. So we're going to start with some truth. Then we're going to move into the why, the what, the who, and the how. There will be some graphs. A dynamic state of the union, some tools, a proof, and a very simple call to action. All right, let's get started. Truth, building products is difficult. This is true whether you are a startup or you're an innovation director for an R&D team. It is difficult for a million reasons. You are trying to design and build something that has never been done before. You are working with a team that has never worked together before, or you're working with a team that has worked together for so long that you know everything about them more than partners and spouses do. You have signed yourself up for failure. 80% of your cohort is going to fail, and yet you have still signed yourself up to do a thing. That is impressive, bordering on insane, but you've done it, and you're here. It's difficult. Some more truth. It doesn't have to be difficult. The truth is that there are any number of pathways to simplify the process. There are kind of rules and and kind of frameworks that can help you get there. And one of the ones that we kind of find ourselves migrating towards is a product strategy. Click, click, click. I think my water glasses get in the way of my clicker. There we go. All right. I am going to move my water glass. See if that helps. So we believe at Uncorked that a cohesive product strategy, one that puts the users first, can reduce organizational friction during the design process. And I think this is probably a concept that is not new to most of you. Like, you're already doing this, you're trying to do this. I think one of the things that has changed over the last few years is that we are designing products not just for one type of user, but for many types of users. You've got internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, you've got consumers, especially in the healthcare industry. You have a variety of kind of competing interests, and so it's hard to design not just for one user, but for many users. And we think that ultimately there's a playbook that can help you design for those different user types. A playbook isn't a guarantee of success. If you're a coach or a person who makes plays for a living, the playbook isn't necessarily an outcome-driven type of thing, but it's something to improve your odds. You want to reduce your risks of failure. You want to improve your chances of winning. You will learn from your playbook. You will modify your playbook, but there is a playbook that can help you improve your odds, and we'll get to that later. All right. So why is this problem so important? There are a number of reasons. First off, like I mentioned earlier, you have all signed yourselves up to do something where the odds are incredibly stacked against you. You are spending significant amounts of your professional working career in pursuit of these. In smaller markets or in heavily regulated industries, the amount of time that it takes to commercialize a product is longer than it is if you are just building a consumer-facing social media platform. And so you want to make the most use of the time that you have devoted towards building your product. You want to develop a product that people are going to use. You want to develop a product that has a chance for success, a chance for commercialization. And so making sure that you are in pursuit of time, or your pursuit of time for developing that product is used well, is incredibly important. And that starts by putting your user first. So, starting with the problem first. So often, I think people start with the solution and then they try to find the problem that solution solves. I think we've seen this time and time again when we work with innovation teams of, that are part of organizations that have a very strong engineering-led culture, very strong technical-based culture. They're like, we solved this thing. You're like, well, wait, what's the problem? So we think that you should start with the problem first. We think that it's helpful to become an expert in that problem. That means understanding the market in which that problem exists, understanding the users who benefit from that particular problem. And then once you've understood that problem, then you start working on the solution. I cannot tell you how many times we've been engaged on a solution from a really well-known technical organization, and then say, hey, help us figure out the problem or the market where this exists. Help us figure out what our go-to-market strategy is for the solution that we've arrived at. What's the problem that we're trying to solve? I think it's really easy for me. My favorite one to pick on is the Juicero, the $600 juicer. It is a juicer that squeezes basically like transfusion-type packets with fresh squeezed juice on the inside. I think it's my favorite IoT failure story. They built a juicer that you could basically squeeze the packets out with your hands. It was an $800 juicer. They raised a ton of money, like $120 million. It failed because no one needed a juicer that squeezed transfusion blood packets to have fresh squeezed juice that wasn't really fresh because it was in a transfusion-based bag. Anyways, start with the problem first. Okay. So what's changed? What is unique about like this moment in time that we find ourselves in? Things that we've seen with the startups that we work with. First, there's just a gap in seed and pre-seed capital. We see that a lot of the VC firms, at least in the kind of the Portland market, have moved into kind of later stage. So all the angel funds are becoming venture funds. People are less willing to make risky bets early on. They want to see more traction. They want to see more consumer feedback or customer feedback or validation. And so they're moving further and further downstream. Our innovation partners are also kind of having the organizational version of this. There are fewer people within large organizations that are willing to take risks. They're playing it safer. They want to keep their jobs longer. Whether it's a combination of kind of external market jitters or just the state that we're in, people are just willing to take less risks. And so what that means is that the opportunities are kind of less interesting because they're safer. They look derivative. Startups that are trying to tackle really complex problems aren't getting off the ground. And so everyone's kind of playing it a little bit closer to their chest. And so, what we're seeing is just generally just a constraining of resources. There's capital resources that are constrained for startups. And I think there's political capital that's constrained within larger organizations. People aren't willing to stick their necks out for something that doesn't have a high likelihood of success. And so that's just another reason why having a solid strategy can help you kind of navigate kind of the resource constraints that we find ourselves in. So who benefits from a product strategy? This is an easy one. It's everybody. The truth is, whether you're a VP of product, whether you're a founder, whether you're a director of innovation, whether you're a consumer for the product, or someone that kind of works alongside or exists alongside, everybody benefits from having a good strategy. It just creates less clutter in the world if you're solving real problems. Click. There we go. So what are the benefits to having a solid product strategy? The first is you might get to know faster. Not every idea is a great idea. Not every idea is a commercializable idea. Not every idea is going to be a unicorn, a zebra, or whatever spirit animal of the startup ecosystem you find yourself in. Not every idea needs to be born within a large organization. Sometimes getting to know faster for a fraction of the cost is the validation that you might need. It's not the one that we want to hear, right? We get attached to our ideas, we get attached to our concepts, but sometimes that's just the truth that we need to hear. But I think more often than not, the benefits of having a solid product strategy are getting to a better yes. We have long said in Uncorked's history, when we would get briefed on a project, that if the thing that we delivered at the end of our engagement was exactly what was presented in front of us at the moment that we were engaged, that we failed. Because we learn things along the way. You get insights from validating a potential product concept. You learn just by the process of co-creating with individuals that you've never worked with. A better yes means that you're listening along the product design and development process, and you're willing to make slight pivots, not giant 90-degree pivots. Sometimes those happen, but sometimes just like slight little attenuation, just a little bit of a nuance. It might be something as simple as like a better onboarding system for something. It might be like a menu item in your product that somehow unlocks a use case that you had never imagined. So better yes. A good product strategy helps you just build usable products. Again, I'm going to keep coming back to this. There are any number of metrics for success, but if the products that you are designing and developing are used by both the customers that you intend to, as well as ones that you never intended to use your product, that is a win. So getting to things that people will actually use. And then I think importantly, building a culture of iteration, that fine-tuning, those small little pivots, like that type of behavior, even if it's just very, very minute, helps build a culture that is willing to take a little bit more risk because you're willing to kind of adjust. You're kind of listening to what's happening in the ecosystem. You're listening to feedback from your customers. These are all good behaviors, whether you're, again, a startup or an innovation director within a large org. All right, for those who are visually minded, we have graphs. So I've talked a lot about a playbook. Let's talk a little bit about the playing field. Imagine a matrix where on one side you've got people who are talking. On the other side you have people who are doing. Your y-axis is things that have been done before versus things that have never been done before. This quadrant right here, that's where consultants live. They love talking to you about what's been done before. Sorry if there's any consultants in the room. But they love talking about what's been done before, right? They're like, this is what's been done before. Here's how you should apply this to your thing. Do this over and over again. People who love talking about things that have never been done before, those are futurists, gurus. They love telling you about like the impending AI doom with the robots taking over. They're fear mongers sometimes, or they inspire us sometimes. They can be on either end of the spectrum. People who do things that have been done before, those are the fast followers. If you're a startup, if you're an innovation team, this is kind of the group that like takes whatever organizational insight you have spent a long amount of time trying to solve for, and they copy it so fast that you're like, wait, now we have competitors. We didn't have competitors yesterday. Why do we have competitors today? It's because of those fast followers. And then we like doing things that have never been done before. We like playing in this space, just because it's fun. I don't like talking about things. I like doing things and then talking about it later. Let's look at the innovation ecosystem a little bit. I've modified, this is like a popular like management consultant graph of like innovation within large orgs. But I've kind of split it apart into two parts. So you've got this idea of connectedness, so kind of where you are at an ecosystem where you've got like weak connections and kind of strong on one side, and then just kind of your scale, so small scale, large scale. Startups are really, really good at getting something started. And they kind of move along the spectrum with speed or velocity. And they kind of get like stuck right around here as they go from their idea that they think is really, really huge, and they're trying to move it into a more connected ecosystem. They kind of get stuck. By contrast, corporations have the ability to get to scale. They have a strong sense of kind of where they sit within an ecosystem, but they're kind of driving kind of towards this kind of middle point. Corporations have mass. There it goes. We think there's a sweet spot in the middle where you try to kind of keep this right balance of like connectedness, because with the corporation's mass, they don't have velocity. Startups have velocity, but they don't have mass. Somewhere in the middle, you've got momentum. Shout out to any physics people in the room. And we think that this is a place where like ecosystem connectors play. So Cambia Groves, ourselves as kind of people that work with both startups and corporations, the people who are kind of the altruistic members of your community that are constantly trying to make connections. Maybe this is like the bow tie of innovation kind of as a model. We don't think that these things can exist in a silo. I don't think it is a reasonable expectation for us to assume that a corporation can solve the entire spectrum, because there's something nice about the velocity that a startup has. At the same time, especially those in healthcare, like there's heavily regulated industries that this startup might not be able to get into this middle point because they're not thinking through all the considerations from like a public policy perspective that a large corporation that has a team of lawyers that are actively lobbying in favor of innovation within a heavily regulated environment. I think this is true for healthcare as much as it is any other regulated environment. Alcohol and spirits is another one that I think has a similar type of kind of framework. So our approach to innovation kind of starts with a dot. People approach us with like an idea or a hypothesis. And then we try to say, hey, we're going to take you through this really kind of organized kind of process where we'll get a bunch of insight, we'll work together to kind of concept some ideas, and then we'll go build a thing. And this, typically involves, at the collection phase, sort of this like rapid ideation, like let's just throw a bunch of ideas at a wall. There's some sort of prototype and validation, and then you actually develop and kind of iterate a product. And again, we kind of imagine this to be a super clean, kind of organized process, but it's literally just a jumbled mess, right? Like you feel like you're making progress, but you're really not going anywhere. And then as you run out of money or resources, you start kind of forcing some level of convergence, and eventually you decide to build a thing. It's not a clean process. It's not a clean process because you have to constantly be listening and attuned to what both your customers, investors, stakeholders are saying. It is never, it's never a frictionless process, but it's one where a product strategy can help you kind of focus sooner and kind of find your pathway towards making that thing. So I've talked a lot about the playbook. Let's share. These are a few things that we think can improve your likelihood of success, reduce your risks of failure. The first, if you can't already tell, is just asking questions early and often. Question everything. Why are we doing this? Why is this better than anything that's existed before? Are we the best ones to do this? We might not be. Who else has looked at this problem, perhaps in like a different swim lane or different vertical? How can we learn from the mistakes of those who have preceded us? How can we avoid sort of the reluctance to get started for those who have failed to tackle this problem before? That squiggly diagram on the previous page, diverge, 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 and then converge. Don't try to converge from the beginning. Like you need to be open to maybe increasing scope before you ever write a single line of code or before you ever design a single screen. Make the problem bigger before you start making it smaller. Get inside the head of your user. Like literally, like go find them, ask them a bunch of questions, understand who they are, what motivates them, walk in their footsteps, shadow them, follow them. There are really lightweight ways to do research that don't involve paying for a giant, quantitative research study. Go find your users, ask them a bunch of questions, and then just observe them. Then ask them more questions. And then align your journey with yours. So back to the idea that we're now living in a very multivariate state of users for any one of our products. It is important to align your product roadmap. So imagine yourself a user of your product with the external kind of users. If you're in healthcare, there's probably 3 or 4 other users, right, that you need to think through. Align all those journeys with your own. Prototype. I can't say this enough. Before you write like a fully polished, finished piece of code or an app, paper and pencil, Sharpies and Post-its, paper prototyping, experience prototyping, then some code prototyping, and vision prototypes are great. But just build that culture of iteration before you go down the pathway of building kind of a finished thing. And then all along the way, get feedback. So go back to those users that you sought insight from early on. Ask them, hey, we made this thing. What do you think about this thing? Does this thing solve that problem that you mentioned way back when? And then repeat this. You're going to learn each time you go through this. Each major rev, each minor rev, figure out what the systems are that make sense for your organization. If you're only asking questions, then you never build anything, so there's obviously limits to this. But this is the playbook. This is what we have used time and time again. I don't think we've always kind of quantified it this way. I think it's just as we kind of took a step back and said, hey, what is similar about some of these projects that we've worked on over the years? What about the ones that we've had the most success with? Amazingly, the ones that we've done the best with were ones that we knew very, very little about the industry or market they were jumping into early on. And so I think that forced us to ask a bunch more questions. The ones that we tended to do less well with were the ones where we had built something similar before, because we assumed that we knew too much. And so, I think that's probably the hardest part of this process is that, especially if you're in a startup where you have incredible domain expertise, kind of reminding yourself you might not be the user for this product. You might know a lot about the market or the industry or the pathway to get there. But imagine yourself in your user's shoes first. So this is the playbook. Let's go through some plays. Just by quick show of hands, how many of you have used like design thinking-ish kinds of things in your process? Cool. All right. For many of you, some of these will be familiar. You may have seen some of these before. Apologies if so. I'm pretty sure you haven't seen the first one. That's Semio. It's one of our own. I'll explain each of these in a second. Empathy maps, product canvases, product roadmaps, and then continuity canvas. These are some of the tools that we use. There are any number of other kinds of tools that can help you both diverge your product concept ideas early on and then kind of work towards kind of converging. Semio is one that we came up with. It's short for semiotics, which is the pursuit of meaning. We try to infuse in all of our colleagues kind of this questioning behavior of questioning everything. And so we've developed kind of a little workshop tool that we use that helps us. Empathy maps were invented by Dave Gray over at X-Plane, really awesome consultancy between Portland that splits between Portland and Chicago. I'll talk through that in detail. And then product canvas and product roadmap kind of feed into that, and the continuity canvas is something that we came up with. So Semio, I'll explain it because it's really kind of hard to have like a straightforward visual for this one. What we do as part of most of our onboarding kickoff for project is we bring in stakeholders in the room. And sometimes that includes interns. Sometimes that includes people who maybe are not at a manager level, but at an individual contributor level. And then we do an exercise that's split up into 3 parts. The first part, everyone takes 7 minutes, and we say, write all the questions that you have about this particular product concept on a sticky. So it's an individual exercise so that the loudest person in the room doesn't outweigh everybody else's opinion. It's 7 minutes on your own. After the 7 minutes are up, we go around and everyone kind of one by one posts up their questions. And what we do is we organize them along 3 kind of columns. So there's a who, a why, and a how. And so based on the question, it goes in the who, on the why, and the how. If someone has the same question as someone else, what we do, rather than saying like, oh, I have the same question as Jim over here, you crumble up your sticky in kind of solid air and you throw it on the floor. And that also makes it really easier to organize later on. Just the idea is not the stickies on the floor. Then we do the same thing with like insights. So insights are kind of like the answers that someone who is a domain expert who has seen this problem before that they might have. And so the insights are done in like a different color. So you can see here, in this one that we did, the questions were on blue and the insights were on purple. And then again, 7 minutes, we kind of organize them according to who, why, and how. And then we do one last thing, which is that we give everyone the opportunity to kind of vote on the ideas or the questions that they think are the most important. And everyone gets 5 votes. They can either stack the votes all in one sticky, which is probably what I did here with like one of my own stickies, or you can split them across different stickies and kind of equally weight them. Sometimes if there's like some super important people in the room, we might give them 10 dots instead of 5 just to kind of gamify it a little bit. And then from there, what we'll do is we kind of synthesize this. So we'll organize this in kind of these little like epics, and we use this to kind of develop like a little mission statement or kind of like a product thesis of like what we think the product is going to do. And then that informs, especially like in the who column, like who are our key personas and people that we're actually developing a product for. It's super easy to use. It's kind of fun to see what the game theory is of like people voting on stuff. And it just puts questioning and asking questions kind of at the forefront to our process. Empathy maps. Who has used an empathy map before? Cool. It's a few of you. So once you kind of know who your user is, this is a really great tool to really just kind of get in the head of what your user's thinking. It's evolved a little bit over the years. I think this is kind of the current version of it. So you kind of draw this like sideways profile face. There's an X kind of through it. And so you kind of go through the exercise. So imagine that this is a patient. You kind of ask yourself like, what is it that this patient, who is this person? What is the situation they're in? What is the role of their situation? What is it they need to do? So these are kind of the goals for this patient. And then you kind of go through the senses. Like, what is it that this person sees? What do they see in the marketplace? What's in their environment? Like, what are some of the things that like are visibly, physically in front of them? What is it that they say? Like, how do they talk to a loved one or someone else that they care about, a provider, an insurance company? Like, what are the things that that they're saying? What are their actions? So different than what they're saying, like, what is it they're actually doing? What behavior have we observed? What do they hear? What do they hear from their physician, from their insurance company, from their colleagues? What are they hearing secondhand? What are the pains that they have? So, like, what are their fears and anxieties? And then gains, like, what are, the wants, needs, hopes, and dreams? And these in particular are kind of like, if you think about it through the lens of your product, the things that are their pain points, like, those are the greatest opportunities for your product to solve a real problem. The gains are sort of the directionality of those things. So if you can, deliver a certain amount of gain, you might convince them to switch from an existing product. It's a super simple exercise. It does not take a lot of time. You should do this for each type of your users that you might have in kind of your multivariate user environment. Double clicked. There we go. So this guy Roman Pichler, and I can work with you to send the links of all the things if anyone wants to grab these later. RomanPichler.com has this one. This is the product canvas. So this is a way of kind of taking the some of the persona data and starting to kind of feed it into your product features. So you've got the name of your product. What's your overarching kind of product goals? What's your target group? So you might want to do one of these for each of your users. So taking maybe your patient. And then what's the big picture? So what's the desired experience? What are the user journeys, the product functionality? Like, what is it that your product does? And then kind of go through the details. Like, what are the specific features that address this person's pain and gain? What I like most about this one actually is the metrics in the upper right-hand corner. How will we know if we've actually accomplished what we set out to do? I think often we get stuck with, like, here's the big picture and here's all the features, or we start with all the features and here's the big picture. Those are great, but, like, how will you actually know when you've gotten there? And then, and you should do that for, again, each of your user types. And then kind of the product roadmap. So looking through some of those goals that you set out for some of those users, actually kind of outlining, like, where do we start today? So, like, what's in front of us? This one is kind of like a date or time frame kind of based. I like 30, 60, 90 as just kind of like rough representations of, like, a near future, a less near future, and a farther future. I think, especially in the early going, if you don't really have a product, like imagining 180 in a year down the line, like, it's great for investor and pitch decks, but it's not really practical because I think this is something you should do every 60 to 90 days anyways. And so if you're trying to project too far into the future, I think your confidence levels go down. And then this is really kind of a way of kind of mapping, like, what are the core features of each release, or kind of the short-term goals, the medium-term goals, longer-term goals. Again, it's just really nice that it has, like, metrics. Like, how will we know if we achieved what we set out to do? It might be conversion. It might be number of downloads. It might be, some sort of external validation. And then the continuity canvas is something we came up with as a result of seeing a lot of really awesome startup ideas emerge from, like, a startup weekend or, like, a hackathon, where, like, people will try to tackle, like, really large, ambitious problems. They'll do some level of, like, customer validation along the way. But you can't obviously, validate an entire product concept. So part of this was designed to really kind of tap into the ecosystem, the neighborhood, the community that you live within. I think this is also important if you are a startup that perhaps didn't come from a startup weekend type event. If you're, someone that's looking at a product from, like, an internal kind of brainstorming session within an organization. The basic idea behind this is, like, figure out who else is looking at this problem, and then go find them and ask them questions. And this, a lot of the kind of top blocks are actually pulling from both the product roadmap canvas as well as kind of the product canvas. And so we kind of ask ourselves, like, whose needs are being met? So who's, kind of the target person? Who mutually benefits? So are there other people in the community that perhaps might benefit from your product that aren't you. They might be a channel partner for you. If you've done a business model canvas, these are kind of like a channel partner that might be someone that advocates for your product. Who pays for it? I think often, and this might be a Portland problem, we have these really awesome ideas that serve people, but the people that it serves the most aren't the ones that are equipped to actually pay for the product itself. So who actually pays for it? How are we making money? Again, another Portland problem. But like making money is not a bad thing. It helps you maintain your business, the thing that you're building. So just ask up front, like, how do we make money? What's the concept? The why now? Ashley Mayer, who used to work at Social Capital, wrote this really awesome blog post a while back on like what's unique about like basically the structure of a pitch deck. And I've always loved kind of the why now, like what's unique about this moment in time. Again, the metrics, how do we know when we've solved it? And then the far right are kind of really the community column. So who are the people in our community who might be mentors for this idea? They're not going to write you a check. They're not necessarily going to be a member of your team, but they may have done this in a previous lifetime. They may have looked at this problem. Go find them, ask them questions. Who are the connectors? Again, these are people that might not write you a check, but they might connect you to someone that might write you a check. They might connect you to a future VP of product or a colleague. Go find the connectors in your community. Who are the advocates? Who are the people that are going to evangelize your idea because they believe in you, they believe in your mission, they believe in your product? Go find them. And then what are the tools that you need to achieve this? Could be as simple as like, I need Slack, and I need Jira, and I need GitHub. But there might actually be other types of tools that are unique to the domain that you're in. And then what I like doing with this is literally printing this out and going to meet with the people in that far right column. And for each of those, I write something custom at the bottom. So like, what's my ask? Like, what's my call to action for you? And then the other person, if they're into it, would write in that little box what they're doing. They kind of tear it away, and like they have like a little physical thing that's like, here's what I've promised and pledged to do. It's kind of hokey. People like it. I don't know. It's the continuity canvas. So proof that this is going to all work. We worked with a startup a little over a year ago called Tenter. They probably don't like to be described this way, but they're kind of like an Airbnb for glamping. So they basically are a double-sided marketplace for people who are large landowners in the Northeast who might want to monetize plots of land by letting people camp on it. And it was more like glamping. So the original kind of business model was they would build you like a yurt-like structure, and then they would make money back over time. You either paid for the yurt-like thing initially, or you'd kind of amortize it over a period of time. They came to us after they had raised a Series A. They'd raised around like $8 million, and we're kind of in this mode of transitioning from I'll call it both the organizational and technical debt that they had accumulated, in that they had built something that was good enough for the Catskills Mountains, and they wanted to scale the whole product nationally, and they had developed a product with a very kind of geographically specific lens of these are people from Manhattan who'd be willing to spend $200 a night camping in the Catskills, and it's like, well, in San Francisco and Oregon or Seattle, like you can find the outdoors not too far away. So why would anyone do this? So I'll simplify this a little bit, but we basically did a Semio session. We led it into kind of the empathy maps, and we kind of came up with a couple of personas or user types. So there's guests, people that wanted to go camping. There were the site leads, which are basically kind of the host equivalents. And then Tenter, as an organization, had goals. And so we went through empathy maps. We went through kind of this is a customer journey map. So tried to understand, what are the goals, the motivations, kind of the frustration and satisfaction for each. And then kind of like general, kind of comfort with outdoors or comfort with technology, just kind of develop a persona for each of these. So we understood later on we could refer to these, persona kind of archetypes as we were kind of developing our product. We then kind of created a product roadmap that aligned both the consumer-facing sets of features with kind of the host or the site lead sets of features, along with like the internal tools that Tenter needed to manage things like customer service or customer support. So they were like the service designy kind of bits and pieces of it. And then we helped them build it. So we helped kind of launch that product. This is kind of another kind of journey map of kind of taking this was just for site leads. So like, what are the phases of this individual's kind of process? So the qualification process, the exploration, kind of the planning, what happens during the visit, and kind of afterwards. Back to that idea of like walking through your user's, kind of like journey, like what are the specific phases that your user kind of goes through, and then what are the particular things that they're thinking and feeling along the way. You can certainly generate this on your own. I think this is better served when you actually ask customers, like, hey, help me understand like what you're thinking and feeling at each of these points along the way. And then we made a site. It was a mobile-friendly website that existed in normal kind of desktop modes. We simplified some of the funnel processes, and then this coming summer will actually be the first kind of full end-to-end season that they get to use the product. So again, just kind of going from early kind of sketches and stickies to a thing that exists in the real world. So why do we do this? Why do we focus on product strategy? Again, I think it is way cheaper to spend money on sticky notes and Sharpies than to spend 6 months of your life building something that no one's going to use. Fail with stickies. I also think that there's something really important about spending time in a room with the people that you're going to have conflicts with later on, and arguing over stickies up front, over things that are important to you up front before there's actual code and time that is spent on things. So it just makes it easier to have those difficult conversations later because people understand kind of where you're coming from. And there's also kind of immense satisfaction that comes from like the creating crumbling that often gets lost in longer development cycles. You know, I know specifically with healthcare, like you're often in that development creation phase for a significantly longer period of time before you can kind of either celebrate a win or before you can even get any sort of validation. And so sometimes these small little bursts of iteration of just prototyping and getting feedback, it might not be as like, endorphin releasing as shipping a product, but getting some level of feedback in the midst of your process, those are like good energy moments for you and your team that you can celebrate like super small wins along the way. And they're good for the soul. All right, call to action. I only have one thing to ask, actually. If any of this stuff has been interesting, sign up for a newsletter with intent.uncorkedstudios.com. Simple ask. Yeah. Thank you.
I know we're at time. It's 1 o'clock, but does anybody have any questions? Quick. No, super clear. Cassie?
Thanks. Great presentation. I love the tactical advice. I have a piece of an inquiry regarding tactical advice. Do you have any tactical advice for what to do when your economic buyer is far removed from the user of the product? Do you try to interview them both and meet both of their needs simultaneously, or do you prioritize your roadmap to meet the needs of the one writing the check versus the poor lady or fellow who has to use the product on a day-to-day basis? How do you balance those sometimes opposing needs?
Yeah, it is something that we see in common. Again, whether you're a startup or an innovation team, sometimes the person who's approving the checks is not the person who sees the most benefit. It's what we kind of created in that canvas. I mean, I think things that help, there's no like single thing. I think showing these are the audiences that we are serving. Here's kind of where you're at and kind of your needs are, and just like having transparency of like, what is the ecosystem of this? So if you're a stakeholder that's a financier, if you're maybe it's a philanthropic type, situation, like, the philanthropist might want more control. And so how do you develop like an arm's length relationship between the person who's writing your check and your product development cycle? And sometimes, you might need to seed a couple of like small little things, figure out like what are the hills that are worth like dying on, which ones aren't. I think everyone sometimes just wants a small win. And so kind of figuring out like what are the small things that aren't necessarily going to be disastrous for your end user. But, I think as a rule, try to design for the end user first and figure out where the person who's writing the checks can play. And that might mean finding another person to write the checks. Sorry.
Anything else? Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Marcelino. That was awesome. I loved it. And thank you all for coming. I want to plug just a couple more things. One is next week we have our 5 Points Policymaker panel event, which is moderated by Cassie Wallander of NVO. She'll be talking to federal, state, and local policymakers about their role in healthcare innovation, and it's very timely. And then we have the Under the Boughs with Dr. Dawn Rucker that I mentioned earlier about these new rules coming out. And our next Lunch and Learn is April 30th. I will be interviewing Kurt about pricing strategy. How on earth do we price in healthcare? So I'm really looking forward to that. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you for entertaining me with your survey. I will read all of them. Maura has a bag up front if you want to put them in there. I really appreciate you coming. Let us know if you have any questions about Cambia Grove.